after my last sabbatical, which was trying to put 10 pounds of sugar in a 5-pound bag. So want to make sure we have the maximum time. Most of you know that we are having an installation service at the late service for Stephanie. I'm part of the installation committee, so I'm going to have to break out by 10:30, but we can go ahead and have a full hour here. Most of you, I think, know Kem, either from the community or from when he's taught here before. A prominent architect in town. We become friends over the years. And last year he called to say, I've just gotten back from Egypt. It was the most wonderful trip ever. And I said, guess what? Amy and I are headed there in November ourselves. So we've had a desire to do this class since then, but we've not been able to organize it until now. So we're very excited to be able to do this. Kem's done great teaching at his home church at Belmead Methodist and has over the years graciously come and shared with the adult faith formation work in our congregation as well. And it's going to be wonderful to hear a architect's perspective on some of the temples and the pyramids, as he himself kind of does the Indiana Jones archaeology oversight. So Kem, welcome. We're so grateful that you're here, friend.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? I've got a little mic here. I see some friendly faces in the crowd. Thank you for coming. Okay, Egypt. I was there just over a year ago, and Guy was there too. And so remember, Guy, you can interject anything that I'm getting wrong. Okay, is this okay? The sound's okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, it's interesting. Getting ready for the trip was just wild. I've studied Egypt since I was a freshman in college. If you see a satellite photo of Egypt, it looks pretty barren except for one thing, and that's the Nile River and the Nile Valley. That photo is showing the greenery of the Nile. It's not actually showing the Nile River itself. It's showing the greenery. This is really interesting because it's a strange country, and there's this ribbon of green, fertile land, and other than that, it's kind of a wasteland. Historic maps show Egypt, and it really became a tourist place after Napoleon visited, and he started discovering all these things that were buried. And of course, try to do my research, get everything. The book on the left is the best book. It's a hard read, but it's really interesting to learn about why Egypt rose and then collapsed. So what I'm going to do is a little bit today is talk about, first of all, Bible study, because when I was, growing up, there's a connection with Egypt with this guy named Joseph. And then there's other connections all the way up to Herod the Great. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Egyptian kingdoms. I can't really do that much because, it will take like 16 years. I mean, it's unbelievable, the history. And then I'll talk a little bit about the remarkable sites. And I'm going to save the best for last, even though it's really the oldest or the second oldest, and that's the Great Pyramid. So let's start with the biblical story. Most of you are biblical scholars. I know the guy is in the back. So I hope I get this right. These dates I think are correct, but so Abram becoming Abraham has a son named Isaac. Okay, right? Isaac has children, and he has twins. And Esau is the first one to come out. And Jacob doesn't like that. And Jacob holds on to Esau's heel and tries to keep him from being born first. Because the firstborn, if you have twins, the firstborn is the guy that receives the inheritance. So in their lives, they fight over the inheritance. You know the story of Jacob's ladder. He's kind of run away, not sure how he's really going to end up in control of or get the inheritance because Esau was the first. Is that how it's pronounced, Guy? Is it Esau? Okay. Well, Esau. Okay. Anyway, Jacob goes out and has a dream, and kind of the dream, God tells him, you're going to inherit everything. Just sort of hang in there. You're going to be the top dog. So Esau is
Clearly has said it wrong.
Jacob is born, and Jacob has 4 wives. Okay, and the second wife has 2 children, and one of them is named Joseph. Okay, he's born to Rachel. This is about 1915 BCE. Okay, Joseph is really the favorite son. Apparently, he's really handsome and he's smart, and he also has dreams about his future prominence. He has 11 brothers that are all jealous of him because he's kind of daddy's favorite. And he's also handsome, so the girls are around him, everything. You know, it's a pretty good life. So, of course, they decide, you know, they're going to get rid of him. They take him out in the wilderness, put him in a pit, but they decide not to murder him. And a caravan comes by, and it's a caravan, and they sell him to the merchants. And, you know, they go back and see their dad, and they say, well, you know, he was killed by a wild animal. Here's his coat of many colors, whatever. And it was, you know, it's got blood all over it, you know. So dad's real upset, but that's what happens. Well, Joseph is purchased by an Egyptian named Potiphar. Now, purchase is kind of a person to use, a person there, and Joseph is around the house, and Potiphar's wife really likes the way Joseph looks. Really likes the way, like, come on in the bedroom. And Joseph doesn't want to do this. It's like, well, first of all, we don't know what the wife really looked like. She could have been beautiful. She could have been ugly, whatever. But Joseph was supposedly, we know he was very handsome. And she is after him. She wants him. Well, he's like, no, no, no. Well, of course, her pride is damaged. I mean, she's like, well, you don't want me? Why not? So, of course, what happens is the king, and this is another version, the king shows up, and Potiphar shows up, and the wife says, well, you know, this guy was hitting on me.
Oh, I know.
Potiphar looks at Joseph. You can't do that. You can't hit on my wife. And of course, Joseph's like, I didn't hit on your wife. She was hitting on me. Well, that's a problem. Potiphar's wife wins the argument. Joseph's sent to prison. And while he's in prison, he starts to interpret dreams. He always had ability to interpret dreams. If somebody had a dream, he'd explain the dream, and he'd say, I think that's what that means. And that starts happening to the guards. The guards are in charge of, and there's a couple of episodes that are really kind of wild, but his ability to interpret the dreams, it catches the attention of the Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh, you know, there's an issue about a coming drought. And Joseph sort of says, your dream is about a potential drought. So you need to start storing up food because it's going to show up. Well, that's what happens. The drought occurs. So, you know, the Pharaoh is like, hey, you're pretty good. I'm going to ramp you up. I'm going to make you very strong in this. And he's called a vizier. And that brings on this musical. Do you remember? I think that's Donny Osmond. And it plays a story. Yeah, but it's a delightful story. It's the second, basically, the end of Genesis. And he becomes the vizier. Now, this is a guy from, you know, another country. He's in Egypt. He's a hot shot, and he's in charge, and he's having a great time. And he's seen as a really smart person by the Pharaoh. So the Pharaoh asks him, like, puts him in charge of stuff. Well, where his family was located, where dad and the other brothers were located, there's a big famine. And so they're desperate for food. So they reach out and try to come from where they are to Egypt. And Jacob, the dad, comes to Egypt. Jacob's name is also Israel in some references, which to me is very confusing, but you know, that's what happens in the Bible. You'll have names that move around. Anyway, they go to Egypt and they find food.
This is wrong. He sent the son.
Hot shot that's there, this vizier. Only tells him, you don't remember who I am, do you? I'm the guy you tried to kill. I'm the guy you saw. And he forgives the brothers. And because of that, the brothers and the family are now saved. And things are working out. And the Pharaoh says, I need to give you some land. I'm going to give you something called the land of Goshen. That's going to be my gift to your people. And it's a really happy moment. Everybody's pretty happy. The Pharaoh's happy. Joseph's happy. Jacob and the 11 brothers are really happy because instead of starving or being killed in revenge, which Joseph could have done, no, he's like, no, we're family. So if you've ever wondered where the land of Goshen is, it's in this area according to this map. It's in the upper part, and it's in the Nile Delta where it spins out. Of course, it's greenery, everything grows there. It's incredible. Now, Jacob dies, and he's buried where they are, somewhere in the land of Goshen. Joseph dies, but he's not buried there. They want his body to be taken back to where the family really was. The Hebrews are in Egypt, and there's prosperity for like 300 years. It's a good time for the Jews, or the Hebrews. And Genesis, the book of Genesis, ends, and everything goes bad. A new Pharaoh comes in and basically says, I don't like these folks. They're having too many children. They're taking over us. They're not Egyptians. We're going to enslave them, and that's what they do. So this new Pharaoh shows up about 1526, and then there's this character named Moses born. And Moses, after many years, sort of grows up. As you know the story, he goes to the Pharaoh and says, you got to let my people go. And of course, the Pharaoh's like, yeah, right. So we're not exactly sure which was the Pharaoh. Now, Moses is making this demand to this top guy. I'm surprised that the top guy didn't skewer him and say, get this guy out of here. But as you remember, the story is that Joseph grew up in the ranks of Egypt. So before he left to go in the wilderness, Moses was considered a very prominent person, could have been a leader, not unlike the way Jacob was. Moses, of course, goes out in the wilderness, sees the burning bush in Mount Sinai, and then comes back to the Pharaoh and basically says, you have to let my people go. Okay, and so which Pharaoh was it? Well, when you see the TV show, not the TV show, but the Ten Commandments, which we always have to watch. I always have to watch the whole thing. It's a great story. A whole lot of it's fiction.
And a picture of it.
Lord only knows. I'm not even bothered. I can't see it.
It just looks like a blob.
And they call him Ramses I think in the movie and everything. So, of course, we know this is the real Ramses, right? And that says the Exodus around 1260. But maybe it was earlier. And many historians believe it was 1478, much earlier, to this king, Thutmose. Now, Moses makes the demands of the Pharaoh. Everything happens, the Red Sea splits, and they leave. But when they leave, they take the body of Joseph with them. And that's in the movie. And there's kind of this scene in the movie, The Ten Commandments, where they're kind of singing low song. They're taking the body of Joseph because they want to bury Joseph back in the Promised Land. They travel from maybe the area of Joseph there down to Mount Sinai.
Terrible.
And of course, this is the big guy. This is the real Moses, right? He goes up the mountain, comes back, has the Ten Commandments, and he needs a place to put the Ten Commandments in something, and they put it in the Ark of the Covenant, which is this golden box. And the box has cherubs on top, and Joseph and then Joshua they're not worshiping the box, they're worshiping God, but God is represented in the box because the Ten Commandments are inside the box. So the promised land, they reach the promised land, and most of you know the story. It's a fascinating story. Moses dies. He doesn't get to go to the promised land. 12 tribes are developed in this area up near what is now Israel.
Right there.
And the promised land becomes an area of 12 tribes. But it's not always peaceful. There's a stele, which is a vertical marker out of granite or stone. And it mentions, it's one of the few places in Egyptian history where it mentions Israel. And apparently this king, Merneptah, or whatever, goes to Canaan and he defeats all these, and it's kind of listed, who he conquered, and Israel. Now we move up to King David, and King David settles in Jerusalem, sort of establishes Jerusalem. And this still continues to have a connection with the Egyptians. Solomon becomes the king. David is not allowed to build this thing called the temple. Solomon is allowed to do it, and the temple will hold the Ark of the Covenant. The first temple is dedicated around 1000 BC. And this is an image of it. We're not really sure exactly what it looked like, but the focal point of the building was what's called the Holy of the Holies in the back, and that's where the Ark of the Covenant rested. Now, Solomon's not the greatest guy, even though he's allowed to build the temple. Solomon's kind of fools around with a lot of different women, and he has an Egyptian wife, and that's not kosher. Solomon dies, and when he dies, before he dies, he has 2 sons, and they're arguing over who's going to get the kingdom. Jeroboam is kind of gets run out of town, and he decides to go to Egypt. And when he's in Egypt, he meets a king called King Shishak. And this king sort of takes him, he shows up and says, well, I'm the second son of Solomon, or I'm the son of Solomon, and I should really have that kingdom anyway, but I got screwed over. So can you help me? He probably had a lot of money and gold with him when he fled Egypt. I doubt if he just left town. He left town probably with a big caravan, like let's get out of here together. So, but in Egypt they meet this King Shishak. King Shishak says, I'll help you and everything. Oh, by the way, I'll get you a little wife too, Egyptian wife. Now remember that the Hebrews, you're not supposed to marry into another group, particularly not the Egyptians. But Jeroboam, pretty wife, and it all works out. Because of this struggle, the kingdom of Israel with the 12 tribes, it splits into 2 parts.
Yeah, I must be back there.
Northern kingdom that Jeroboam is interested in, and then the southern kingdom. Now, the northern kingdom, Jeroboam becomes king, and the southern kingdom, where Jerusalem is located, Rehoboam is the king. Now, Shishak had helped the guy in charge of the northern kingdom, and so Shishak leads a raid on Jerusalem in 930 BC. Now, Shishak may be another king. They're not quite sure. This could have been this other king. But when you see the story, the Raiders of the Lost Ark, which Guy mentioned, it's actually focused on Shishak, because when the very first of that movie, they say, well, they found a book. They know where King Shishak was, and they know where he took the Ark of the Covenant, because in the Bible, it said that King Shishak, he came against Jerusalem, and he took the treasures of the house of the Lord. He took away everything, which means he probably took away the Ark of the Covenant. They're not sure. Now, of course, Israel is sort of split. The tribes are all fighting each other. The Syrians come in. The Babylonians eventually destroy Jerusalem. There's exile. Everybody goes to Babylonia. Then they come back and they start a second temple. Second temple's built. It's probably not anywhere as nice as the first one. And then we move way up quickly to Herod. Okay, now Herod builds this temple, which is a total enlargement of the second temple. So you have Solomon's temple, you have the second temple, and then you have Herod's temple. And Herod's temple is magnificent. If it was still there today, it would be one of the seven wonders of the world. It's about 100 feet tall, incredible, on a platform called the Ark of the Covenant is not in this structure because it just gets it isn't mentioned in the Bible in the Old Testament anymore. But building the big temple is still a really big deal, and that's where Jesus when he visited, he may have visited the structure. Herod's temple is finished. The really big one's finished in 37. You know, the story of Jesus is born, but because Herod got tricked by the wise men, Herod, you know, is out to kill all the children, all the young boys in the nation. And so there's the flight to Egypt. Okay, and I love this painting that shows Mary with the baby, and then Joseph is another Joseph, a different Joseph, is tuckered out, you know, and they're trying, you know, they go to Egypt to get away. So again, there's a connection with biblical reference to Egypt. We're not sure where they went. When Herod dies, Joseph knows that there's another person in charge in Judea, so he decides to go to Galilee, and therefore Jesus grows up in Nazareth. Yes.
He was at the top quarter in Cairo, and there was a map of one of the churches that showed all of these monasteries on the west and on the east side of the Nile, basically all the way down, all of which suggested Jesus and Mary and Joseph stopped at these places along there. But the Coptic Christian community grew up based on the sense that Jesus had been there, which really wanted to start going.
Yeah, one thing I was very surprised when I went to Cairo and then other parts of Egypt is that the Coptic Christians and even Catholics, I mean, they're recognized, and they have churches and facilities and cathedrals. It would take me, again, about 30 years to tell you the story of Egypt. But one thing I just want to explain is there's a reference to kings and pharaohs. It's the same thing. There's no real difference, okay? It was called King Shishak in the Old Testament, but it could have been a pharaoh. And at the bottom is a list of the very prominent pharaohs. And I'm going to only focus on a couple of them, okay? So when I got to when I went to Egypt, and there are different ways to explore, this was kind of my path. I started in Cairo, which is, you know, the biggest city and has so many wonderful things. But then I went down to Luxor, which is kind of in the middle of the country. And finally, I went to a little area called Aswan. And Aswan is a little north of this enormous dam that was built. And that dam creates so much electricity that Egypt has no problem with power. In fact, I asked one of my tour guides, you know, I don't see any solar farms here. He said, oh, we don't need those things. We don't care. And electricity is very abundant. I think the power lines look very dangerous to me. Like, I wouldn't quite trust the Egyptian electricians, but the whole idea of, even though it's incredibly hot and sunny there, I think they get 1 or 2 inches of rain in Cairo. And so, it's a perfect place for solar energy. And they're like, no, we don't need it. We got the dam, hydroelectric stuff works fine. And you can see how the dam at the bottom as it goes from one country to another.
This is worthless. I mean,
in Cairo, there are fascinating things. There's the old Egyptian museum, which is they're finally taking everything out of it, put in a new one. And then most importantly are the pyramids, the reason I went. Cairo is a pretty wild place at night. This was a view from my hotel. I stayed at a really nice hotel, the Four Seasons, and I looked out the window, and this is what I saw at night. I mean, it's a hustling, bustling town. You cannot believe the traffic. I've never seen such wild traffic in my life, but not fast. It's like five lanes of traffic going the same direction. Nobody pays any attention to any rule. And cars are going like this. And every 2 seconds, a little scooter goes by with a person. One scooter goes by with a person and his wife and a baby. She's just holding the baby in a little scooter, no helmets. And it all moves forward very slowly. Really strange. The old museum is they're slowly moving everything out of this museum, but it was a fascinating place. So I went to Saqqara. Saqqara is where the oldest pyramid is located. It's called the Step Pyramid. There's an enormous forecourt in front of it. And when you're in architecture school, you have to learn, because this is the first architect that's mentioned, Imhotep. It's different than the pyramid that we're all really fascinated with, the one like this, although they could have been built the same. If you look at the king's chamber is at the bottom under the pyramid. And if you notice, there's a white line there where that is a tunnel that's underneath. And so when I got there, I walked down this path into that door, and there was a little guard there. You have to pay to get into these things. And I walked, but there was nobody there. We went early in the morning, so there was nobody in this corridor. It's just me, and I'm walking through this thing that, you know, pretty spooky. They have put in these columns. Apparently, this was a passage, and they put in the columns later. But when you get to the very end of the passage, you look down about 60 feet to the sarcophagus. It's way down below. There's another path or another tunnel that goes down to it. But, you know, I'm just stunned looking at this thing and thinking about, okay, how'd they get these things down there? How'd they get these large pieces of granite down there? I mentioned Luxor, and I will come back to the big pyramids. Went to Luxor. Luxor, and Egyptian history is very confusing because I've heard of Thebes. Okay, Thebes. There's Memphis, that was a capital. Luxor, well, you know, what's right? Well, Thebes is Luxor. It's just the same thing. It's just a different name. And in Luxor, there are three major things. The Luxor Temple, and then this thing called the Avenue of the Sphinx, which I didn't even know about, and then the Karnak Temple. You know, Karnak the Magnificent, right? Remember Johnny Carson? I just love that. I hold in my hand the last envelope. So here's Luxor, and the Nile is to the left. And basically, there are two major temples. The one at the bottom is called Luxor Temple, and the one further up is Karnak Temple, which is larger, but they are both incredibly impressive. When I stayed in Luxor, in the bottom, where the bottom circle is located, you see below that, it says the word Winter Palace, right below the green circle. Okay, that's where I stayed. And I spared no expense on this trip. It was just me and a tour guide and stuff. So I thought, well, I really ought to stay there nice. And I think Agatha Christie wrote part of Murder on the Nile at this place. And it is a wonderful, you know, old hotel. Here's a view of the temple, and the Nile's to the right. And you see that green area to the kind of upper left? It looks like that's the courtyard behind this hotel that I stayed in called the Winter Palace. Here's a picture of the Winter Palace. Pretty nice. And I stayed in a room with one of these big old keys, you know, these huge keys you get, and you can barely carry it in your pocket because it's so big. It was nice. The Luxor Temple has been restored, a lot of it, and it's absolutely fabulous. It has this strange site plan where it's crooked, and I can't always get a good answer about why they would build it and then shift the floor plan. But as you notice in the site plan, it's just dotted with columns. So this is a twilight view coming in from the entrance area. entrance area has one obelisk. Another obelisk was there. It was moved somewhere else. It's either the one in Paris or somewhere else. But you encounter these incredible columns, and they're just one after another, and it's kind of a strange space because it's just full of columns. At night, they light up the place, and it's spectacular. Now, this is a statue of a pharaoh, but it's carved out of one piece of granite, and I don't know how they did it. I don't know how they did it. It's incredibly detailed. Granite is really hard. I mean, we've used granite in a lot of our projects, particularly at the Bicentennial Mall. Granite is, you have to cut it with a diamond saw. You have to cut it. Even big slabs, they use a big wire saw that has industrial diamonds on it to cut granite, and it takes forever. How do they cut these things? Not to mention these are limestone columns, beautiful space, and you know, these large things they call the pylons, the big structures. And then at night, you know, and I was there, walked out, there's the moon right above one of the obelisks, one of the two is still there. Well, what you discover though is that's Luxor. Luxor is at the bottom here, but it leads to something else, and that's called the Karnak Temple. And from one to the other is something called the Avenue of the Sphinx. Well, it is the Avenue of the Sphinx. I think it's like 1.5 miles long or something. I mean, it's really long distance. And they said you could walk it and say, I think I'll pass. Because when I was in Egypt, most days I was there is like in the upper 90s and no clouds. I mean, beautiful skies. And there it is. And they're trying to, actually buildings were built on top of this, and they're trying to unearth everything so that this path can really be acknowledged, because you went from one temple in a procession to the other. It was a big deal, you know, like a homecoming parade, only much more sacred. And the Karnak Temple is enormous. There's a lake there, a man-made lake. It's a compound. There's so many different structures. And it's, again, the land of columns. You know, this one area is just full of columns. I don't exactly know what they did in it. I'm sure Egyptian historians can share with us, but it's an enormous place. But then we have to remember that Napoleon had discovered all this stuff. So in the 1860s, people were down there were like, we got to, what else is here? And a lot of the Egyptians didn't care, or their government didn't care. It's like, well, you know, it's just old stuff. What's the big deal? Well, the historians are like, you know, this is the foundation of our civilization. And so many things were done, and it's mysterious. And so, you know, this is really good archaeology, and it's still mysterious, and it's still going on. So the Karnak Temple is, and it's not just the Avenue of the Sphinx, it's Avenue of the Rams. But as a temple, it's just absolutely enormous. And, you know, you get in these scenes where you're looking up. Yeah, I just can't believe how they did it, how they lifted the stones up. There's another view in one of the courtyards. And of course, the Pharaoh, whoever was the Pharaoh at the time, he must love himself, because they have the same thing, his picture over and over and over again in stone. There's something called a sacred lake. There's a man-made lake. And I read something that said this lake has never been dry. I thought, no, that's a big lie, because they have pictures of it with no water in it. But you get stuff like this where the sun rises, and you know, that's a marvelous time. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but I think it's like one of the solstices or something, you know, the sun comes in. But Luxor is really well known for the Valley of the Kings. Yeah. And that is this. Luxor's down at the bottom. And again, the spelling is even different. Luxor. To the west, on the other side of the Nile, is all this weird stuff. Funerary temples, the Colossus that I'll mention, and then the Valley of the Kings. Now, funerary temples are temples built there. So you go and you remember a king that died. You go and you honor him and you pray to him and everything. But he's not there. His sarcophagus is not there. His sarcophagus is hidden. It's in the Valley of the Kings. You come on this thing, okay? You've seen pictures of these two statues. I read that they're carved from one piece of stone. I couldn't get it close enough to really see any detail. But what I found out is that these are the remnants of something. These are the remnants of an enormous temple that was destroyed. It was one of the largest, 86 acres. And Amenhotep the third. But there's only two things left. And the only two things that are left are the two little statues at the front of the temple. It was like this. Now it's this. That just freaks you out. Why did they tear these things down? Well, the pharaohs, a new pharaoh would come in, and either he was part of the family, like inherited, or he's not part of the family. Like, we get rid of this guy, just tear everything down. Can't believe they would destroy such a big thing. But then comes Amenhotep the fourth. Now, he's the son of the guy you just saw with the big temple. But he changes his name, and he changes his relationship in religion. He basically says, look, all these gods, all these little gods and everything, they don't matter. There's one God, and it's the sun god, monotheistic, okay? This is a big deal because, in a way, Moses was doing the same thing, monotheism. And some people say there may have been some connection with this. I don't really know. But Amenhotep changes his name to Akhenaten. Aten. And Aten means sun god, Aten. Now, he ruled for a long time. His wife was Nefertiti. And he basically says, look, we're getting rid of everything but one God. I don't want you guys messing with me. That's not really popular with all the priests that are in charge of all these other gods. That's how they make their money. I mean, literally, you got a God for everything, God for plants, God for water, God for soil, whatever. And they're all different names, and some of them have crocodile heads on everything. But basically, Amenhotep, Akhenaten comes in and says, it's over. Just get over it. It's done. Remember Astro in the Jetsons? I love Astro. He's in my new book that I've written about this guy named Ed Nellen, but completely. But I just loved Astro because y'all remember Rastro, the talking dog. And what would Astro say if something really bad's going to happen? Ruh-roh, that's right. And isn't that funniest thing? I don't know who came up with that. Well, these priests are like, Ruh-roh, we're not happy about that. Because basically, they're all fired. You're done. Go away. And even he establishes a new capital at Amarna. And it's enormous. He builds a new temple, the grand temple to Aten, not Amun-Ra, to Aten. And then he becomes the daddy of somebody. You recognize this name? Well, not this name. Tuck-Hinton. Tuck-Hinton. That's his son. Now, he dies in 1334 BC. And Tuck-Hinton becomes the king. And when he becomes king, he's very young. And so the priests all show back up and like, well, we didn't like your daddy. We didn't like your daddy at all. And you're kind of this young fellow. You're now in charge, but can't we come back with all these gods? And that's what happens. The priests show up and they actually make Tuck-Hinton become Tuck-Amen. And that's King Tut. Okay. This is a big deal because now the priests are all back in charge. They're dealing with a very young king who probably didn't understand this or didn't have strong feelings about it. And Tut is buried in this place called the Valley of the Kings. And it's a pretty spooky place. We got there really early in the morning, which is good because if you go really early, the big buses haven't shown up. I mean, and literally I was in King Tut's tomb with like one other person, which is really wild. But I mean, we were there like at 7. And this is a tomb. You go in, And King Tut's tomb is very small. I don't know, you've read everything about Howard Carter discovering it, but it's a series of sort of rooms, and it's got the stairway where he looks through the door and says he sees wonderful things. You know, he sees these priceless objects. Of course, none of them are there. All of them have been moved, including the sarcophagus and the great mask, funeral mat. But, you know, I'll take you a journey. You walk down these stairs, okay, down the stairs. And this is looking back at that stair. And then you go in there and his mummy is in the place. They had it somewhere else, but they put it back there because they thought King Tut's mummy should be in the place. And there's one guy, there's always somebody there just sitting there, and this is a guy just kind of watching, making sure you don't do anything wrong. And then you go over where the sarcophagus actually was in a room. But notice there's not much decoration on the walls. And of course, they think King Tut was killed, may have been killed, may have been murdered, or he just died early of an accident, whatever. But they got him into this tomb very quickly. Not so with others. Later comes King Seti. Now, this is enormous. It's unbelievable. This thing is like 40 to 50 feet underground.
We're disappointed.
And highly decorated. Stairs, and you keep going down, keep going down, keep going down. You see these enormous plaster,
He's on a doghouse.
incredible artwork. They've got guards around it, you know, to protect it, but it's illuminated.
They did
Then
that.
what you notice is the ceiling.
Yes, you did. And he
And
did.
just beautiful depictions. But one of these, this is Seti's in this thing, and his sarcophagus was supposedly in this zone. But then you look up, and this is what you see. Now, I don't know about you, but that's the ceiling in a room that's 40 to 50 feet below ground, maybe further. How did they do it? How did they paint it? Nobody knows. I asked my friend, how'd they do it? Well, they could use lamps, little oil lamps. I'm like, yeah, right. That's not enough light. The detail in the ceiling is spectacular. Whoa. I said, torches. Well, probably torch would be, you know, it would have, you know, smoke up there, and, you know, everybody die of asphyxiation. So how did they do it? They still don't know. There is a theory, though, and I've seen this, and you never know if it's right, but that the Egyptians documented something that was kind of like a light bulb, for real. It's called the dendrolite. And they think it may have been made with chemicals, because the Egyptians were really, you know, smart. They're playing with chemicals a lot, that it may have given off some type of light. Okay. Tutmos reigns, and the reason I'm bringing that up is they're still continuing exploration in the Valley of Kings. They actually found they confirmed that this tomb was his in February of this year, and but apparently it was his tomb originally, but it flooded, and so they moved the pharaohs, the priests, and everything moved the body out of it, but the tomb still existed, and they found evidence that yes, that was his real tomb. Okay, then I mentioned Aswan. That's further south, and there are many things there. The most interesting thing are the temples of Philae. What happened is the Nile didn't have a dam on it until, you know, there were actually two dams. And when the dams were being built, there was this great urgency. We've got to save these things because this water is going to come up and it's going to flood this. And so Philae is basically taken apart and it's moved to another island. And it's wild to see the original photographs of what was there, and even a picture here. You know, this thing's flooded water. You can't go to it. Water. Of course, the Nile floods up and down anyway. But these pylons and everything that were there, people said, we have to save these. What are we going to do? I mentioned the Aswan Dam. The Aswan Dam is 5 miles long. It's an earthen dam, and that's the one that gives so much power for the electricity. And it was built by the Soviet Union because at the time, the Soviets and the Egyptians were really good buddies. But these are all things that have been moved to a new location. Now, I love this because being an architect, we always study the top of columns, the capitals, the top of a column. And it's like, okay, get over it. Which one do you like? There's so many different styles. And then this one thing, kiosk of Trajan. Trajan was a Roman emperor, so this is not that old. But when you're down on the river, as I was, a little boat, you look up, it's absolutely spectacular. So Aswan is not promoted as much, but I think it's equally wonderful. I did not go to Abu Simbel. It's a long way to get there, and the only thing is there is this. It's well, the two wonderful structures there. So I saved the best for last, the pyramid. Okay, ready? This is a really interesting photo because it looks like the pyramids are out in the middle of nowhere. They are not. They are in a town called Giza, but Giza comes up in the Nile Valley. Giza is a developed town, hundreds of homes and buildings, and it comes over, and then there's this rise up to a plateau. It's like 70 feet up, and on the plateau are the pyramids. And I'm like, when I get there, I'm like, this is really crazy because I thought the pyramids are down, you know, with the Nile Valley. They're like 70 feet up on a plateau. There's the plateau. And then you're looking at this thing, these pyramids. Now, this is one, there are two really big ones and a smaller one. The Pyramid of Khafre is the one that still has limestone at the top. They believe both pyramids were covered with smooth limestone, and that over time either those fell off, or more likely the Egyptians living in Cairo, they don't care about the Pharaoh. You know, pharaohs and kings, they've all been gone forever. Let's go get that stone. There's the Sphinx. Sphinx to me was a real disappointment. It's really weird structure. I mean, there's his head, and then he's got these paws sticking out. Kind of strange, but it was a place that you would go to and pray to the king that was the Pharaoh was buried in one of the pyramids beyond. So, but the big one is called Khufu. All right. And they think this is the way it may have really looked with polished limestone, maybe gold at the top. And after Napoleon visits and some other things, people get really interested. Like we got to find out what's inside this thing. What is it? What, you know? Pyramid was the largest structure in the tallest structure in the world until the Washington Monument was built. Okay. And of course, there are all these things about the geometry of it and its connection, the connection of the three pyramids to the Belt of Orion. The Belt of Orion will start showing up in the sky in the fall. And when you look up at the Belt of Orion, there's the Belt of Orion, that's Orion constellation. The three stars, the Belt of Orion. And that these things line up with that. And it's pretty interesting because it's pretty close. And that there are alignments at certain times with inside the pyramid, there are shafts, and they're not big enough to walk through. They're like this big, and they go from some of the chambers all the way to the outside. And so people think, well, those relate to stars or certain constellations. And I can't explain any of that. But people, so many people study this stuff. And of course, the pyramids on our dollar, right? And there was pyramid power when I was coming out of college. And I don't know if you remember that. Everybody thought that pyramids have a sacred power because if you put something like a razor blade under it, it doesn't get dull. Who knows? But let's talk about how big it is. Okay, this is Centennial Park, right? How big is a pyramid? It's that big. You know, Parthenon is 61 feet tall. The pyramid is right at 450 feet tall. It's enormous. It takes up 13 acres. Oh, let's look at this. New stadium, right? You been by there? It's pretty big. Not that big. It's incredible. I mean, when you're there, you're like, I was not ready for it. I knew it was big. I wasn't ready for it. It was just so overwhelming. You know, the bottom, of course, the tourists all wandering around, but you start seeing these stones. I mean, these stones are this tall. You know, they weigh 2 or 3 tons each. I mean, look at the scale. I mean, I don't know how they picked them up. And they're not really sure how they picked them up. But inside is really fun. As I wrap this up, thank you for being very patient, is that what's inside? Of course, I told my tour guide that set up the, really, Jim Whitaker, he was just a wonderful guide, set up everything. I mean, he didn't go, but he set up everything. I said, look, I want to get in the pyramid. He said, you will. And he said, you'll get into 2 more. And I showed you the first one, Luxor, I mean, the step pyramid, where I walked in and looked down. Well, this is different. The King's Chamber is not below the pyramid. The King's Chamber is up in the middle of the pyramid. And where you see this thing. And then there's something called the Grand Gallery. And I've seen a lot of pictures of it. And I thought, I've got to see this thing. When they built the pyramid, there were all these trap doors and a lot of things that when they put the king's body in the sarcophagus, as they backed out, they lowered big stones into places and they made other trap doors so no one could get to them. And there are remnants of that still. So when you look at the pyramid, you see this entrance area, and that's the real entrance was, but it didn't work and they couldn't get through it. So a guy carved his own tunnel in it that you see it starts on the far right. And that's this tunnel that's outlined. And it was this Al-Memnon's forced passage. It's a tunnel he made to get to the damn thing, to get inside. And so this is the way it looks. You know, there's always there's somebody takes up a ticket and you go along that pathway and then you get to the thing that's circle passage. So I'm walking along there and then you go up this passage. Well, this passage is pretty low. I mean, it's like this high. And so you're walking up these steps. The steps are not original. The steps were put in. It was actually a long ramp originally. And, you know, the railings on the side have been added. Then you go up that passage and then you get to the opening of what's called the Grand Gallery. Now, this is the wildest thing I've ever been in my life, the Grand Gallery, okay? It is a tall space that steps up. At the top, it has flat roof, and it was a slope ramp. And this is a picture when in the 1910s, archaeologists got in there and started making photographs inside. What is this real thing? And it's very strange because it has these cutouts on the side and it goes up like this. And that design is to move the forces of the pyramid downward. And there it is. And it's just like spooky. There's nothing on the walls. And at the very tip top, when you get all the way up, there's an opening. Now that's granite. So you can see the granite's been cut.
Yes.
And you get into the King's Chamber. And that Grand Gallery on the left ends up with that little opening you see at the bottom. And there's a picture from from the early part of the 20th century looking at the opening. And that opening leads into something called the King's Chamber, which is on the left. Now the King's Chamber it's a room, but above it are these wild structures that go up that form like a roof or something. And those stones help defray the forces of the pyramid coming down. Let's go in the King's Chamber. Not much to see. There are no paintings, just one thing, and it's a granite. Now the the walls are a stone from the area. They're not granite, the walls. But the sarcophagus is red granite, and that thing weighs probably about 6 tons. And I don't know how they got it in, because they must have put it in and built the thing around it, because this thing is heavy. Khufu, right? That's me. And the guy said you have to close your eyes, like the Pharaoh's done. Anyway, there, and of course it's spooky. It's total silence. Silence like I've never heard, even being in Cumberland Caverns. So I end with this. They have just finished, and they're going to dedicate it soon, like pretty soon, something called the Grand Egyptian Museum, which they've been planning. They started it like 25 years ago. And when I got there, or when I said I was going to go to Egypt, I told my tour guide, I want to get in there. He said, well, it's not going to be open yet. I said, I really like to get in there. He said, we'll get you in. So a year ago, even though it's not open to the public, I got in. And I got in with probably like 20 other people. You know how this works? You know, the guide comes up and says, no, here's a little bit of money. No, no, no. Tipping in Egypt is wild. Everybody wants a tip, and they want dollars. They don't want Egyptian pounds. So if you go to Egypt, you need to take about $1,000 in $1 bills, because I'm literally everything I went to. And I think maybe my tour guide kind of come this good to the guard, and we went inside. But this is going to hold everything that's valuable in Egypt. It's going to hold the Tut collection. It's going to hold everything else from the big old museum. And it's wild because it faces, it's at the edge of Giza, and it faces the pyramids. So when you go in the building, the sort of triumph is to go up the building, and you go up these grand stairs. When you get to the top of the stairs, you're looking at the pyramids. It's pretty breathtaking. Enormous statue of Ramses II. And then I mentioned the stair step, and that's just one, that's the stair step that goes up the very top. That's just one little part of this enormous museum. Now, when I was there, Tut's stuff was not there. It was still downtown, and I saw it in the downtown museum. It's an incredible place, and I urge any of you that have a chance to go. I never felt any danger. The Egyptians, obviously the Egyptians are Muslim, most of them, but there are Christians there. My guide was a Coptic Christian, and so they're so friendly. They're very interested in America. You know, America's kind of a weird place to them. You know, they live in this, it's a strange place to live. I would never want to live in Cairo. I really wouldn't. But visiting it was remarkable. And I urge anybody, if you've got time, go there. I think you will just be amazed. Thank you.
It's one of the worst presentations.
Okay, questions?
I like
You're gonna let me off the hook without some questions? Yes.
Austin. Jesus.
What? Yes. Yeah, it's right near the pyramids. It's called the Grand Egyptian Museum. They were supposed to dedicate it 3 years ago. And then the Egyptians are not real good on certain things, like deadlines. You think we're bad on deadlines? No comparison. Yes, sir.
And then set up the government place at each of these.
Yes, I mean, they would decide, you know, I don't want the government here. Either the previous pharaoh had too many of his buddies there, we need to move somewhere else. But they move the capital all the time. And I'm sure there's more politics than anything, because all the capitals were located along the Nile, and for the water and for vegetation. I got to tell you, the Nile Valley is absolutely beautiful. The greenery area, and I didn't go on a boat tour, but some people do. But I went along the road where I was looking, and it's just field after field, beautiful. And then beyond, you see everything rise up, and it just becomes stone. I mean, it's like when we talk about the land of the wilderness. Yes. I was there for 2 weeks. I went by myself. I wanted my wife to go, but I said, why don't you go? And she said, I said, we're going to Egypt. She said, it's dangerous. And I said, well, but it's got the pyramids. Okay. So I said, why don't you join me in Athens? She said, well, I've heard Athens is, because I was coming back through Athens on the way back after the 2 weeks in Egypt. She said, well, I've heard Athens is dirty. I said, yeah, but it's got like Parthenon. By the way, if you go to Egypt, you got to go to Athens. The Parthenon is so much more beautiful than I thought it would be. The Grecian stone marble that the Parthenon is made out of is actually spectacular because they've cleaned it. You know, the building was blown apart, but it's still on top of that. Acropolis is, it's just, it's so different though, because at the Acropolis, they know how they did everything. You know, they can explain how they lifted the stones, how they put it attached. It's still remarkable, the accuracy and what's called enthesis, which is where the part of the floor of the Parthenon has a bow in it, and it's an optical illusion to make the building not look bowed when you look at it. And to me, that was fabulous. Now, I didn't see any of that in Egypt, but what you see in Egypt, you can't explain. Yes. And now, the best theory I've read, because a lot of people say, how did they build it? And there's things about they build a big ramp or something. I think one of the stories I've read is that they actually started with a series of ramps that went around the thing. And as they got each section finished, they sort of filled in where the ramp turned. And that literally they built it as a series of ramps to the top. That's the one I can most believe. And they've said they've discovered some stones on the corners. If they take out a stone or another stone, they find a stone that's kind of curved. So that's where the ramp was, and they moved the stones around and hauled them up. But, you know, this is a priceless archaeological treasure. So you can't just show up and say, hey, I'd like to come move some stones. Can you let me do it? I mean, and of course, the Egyptians are they're very protective of all these places. They're very open to exploration. I think there are no dummies. There's money to be made. I mean, and, but by the way, when I went, one good thing is I was just traveling by myself, which is kind of lonely at night. But the thing that was really good is if you're in a smaller group, you're not depending on the busload of tourists. Because as I left the Tut tomb, there were probably 50 buses that pulled up within the time that I was in the, and each bus, 50 people trying to get into Tut's tomb. And, you know, it's all, the Egyptians are very good at timing, like they won't let too many people get in there. Like even in the pyramid, they only let one person maybe every 30 minutes go in because you got people in it. And when I was in it, it was, I mean, there were other people in it. But that's the value of going to a smaller group, particularly if you're getting into some of these really tight knit spaces. Any other questions? Yes.
Well, how long did it take to build?
That they don't know. They think around 40 to 50 years. And of course, the old stories were slaves built it. But the modern Egyptologists, I think they more say like, no, we know that there were places for people to live in this area nearby. They've discovered all these kind of it's like workers housing nearby, and they've discovered a lot of them. So they're saying, no, people live there. And of course, with the Nile, you have the growing season, and then you have the harvesting season. So during the harvesting season, that's where everybody works on harvesting. But the growing season, you know, you got a civilization, you know, these guys, what are they going to do? And they may have helped build the pyramid. So it's kind of done in a seasonal event. But I don't really know. And a lot of people debate how that happened. Yes, ma'am. How far is it from water? I'll bet it's about a mile from now. Maybe not quite that far. And that's an interesting question because remember seeing the Sphinx? The Sphinx, they think, at that time, the Nile may have had a different course, and it was a lot closer to the pyramids, the water of the Nile. And that's how they got stones. They brought stones in by boat and then unloaded them and then hauled them up to the pyramid. But I'm thinking, okay, so what Egyptians had a boat that could carry like a 5-ton thing? Like, I don't, you know, I don't remember that. But who knows? Hey, listen, thank you for sticking around. Hey, listen, do you ever, I'm gonna email. Friends of the Lamb